Relax and listen to the voice. The Pope Lick Monster is said to be a strange, savage amalgamation. He's often described as a large humanoid creature with furry goat-like legs, alabaster skin, wide-set eyes, and horns that protrude from his greasy fur. The monster is sometimes referred to as the Goat Man or even Sheep Man. According to the stories, the beast was originally captured in the wilds of Canada around the end of the 19th century. The Goat Man became the star of a circus's freak show until an electrical storm caused a train derailment. This devil-like creature was supposedly the only survivor of the derailment. Instead of returning to the vast northern wilderness, the Goat Man made his way to the Pope Lick Trestle and is said to reside there even now. The monster is said to possess a wide array of supernatural skills to lure people out onto the trestle, including mimicry, telepathy, and/or hypnosis. Once a victim is lured onto the trestle, the Pope Lick monster uses its abhorrent physical appearance to frighten its intended victims, causing them to leap or fall to their demise. Some versions of the legend insist that the monster waits for the train to approach, then, from beneath the trestle, holds its charmed victim down until the train runs them over. Climbing onto the trestle for a glimpse of the Pope Lick monster has long been a recreational activity for reckless Louisville area youth. While even entertaining the idea of such an absurd creature might make even the most ardent paranormal enthusiast feel foolish, the Pope Lick monster has killed at least 3 people, and that's apparently a fact. The December 30th, 1988 Louisville Courier-Journal ran a front-page article entitled Trestle of Death, in which it records 2 tragedies. Jack J.C. Charles Baum II, a 17-year-old Spalding University student, was struck and killed by a train February 18th in 1987 while crossing the trestle. He has since been eulogized at the site of his death. JC, we love and miss you, can be found spray-painted on the trestle's base. In May 1987, 19-year-old David Wayne Bryant died of injuries obtained in 1986 when he jumped from the trestle to dodge an oncoming locomotive. Versions of the Pope Lick monster legend have been in circulation since around the 1960s, and the area around the trestle was a popular party location for area youth. But it took the Louisville premiere of the 1988 short film, The Legend of the Pope Lick Monster, to persuade the railroad it needed something more daunting than trampled chicken wire to keep the public off of the trestle. The night of the said movie premiere, 2 boys were arrested when they attempted to climb out onto the trestle. Immediately thereafter, a 6-foot-high security fence was installed. The fence, along with the heightened police presence, still hasn't kept people away from the tracks. In 2000, a 19-year-old Mount Washington man named Nicholas Jewell was shaken from the trestle by a train's vibrations after he tried to hang from the trestle to avoid being hit by a train. I was laying in my bed in my flat in Wales, and my partner Natalie was in the other room playing games on her phone. It was a night with intermittent rain showers and spells of moonshine, and everything was pretty quiet. That was until I heard footsteps from the front door coming up the stairs, so I went and checked. There was nothing there, but I did sense something, and I sensed more than one presence. Luckily to me, the presence of both of these entities that I felt seemed to be benign and almost welcoming, and I got the impression that they were checking or looking for something, so I kinda just settled back into bed and read by just using the bedside lamp. Not much longer after that, I heard some scratching sounds coming from the bathroom, and I got up. My whole flat was in darkness except for the lamp I was using to read and Natalie's phone. I then went and stood at the doorway of the bathroom, and I watched the bathroom light click off and on, followed by the kitchen light, and then I heard more scratching, and then the light flicked off and on again. I watched transfixed as the hall light switched on and off, and I felt two things scuttle past me, and then the same happened in the guest bedroom, the room that Natalie was in. And suddenly, I felt an energy pass right through me, not once, but twice, less than a second apart, and then all of a sudden, the bathroom light switched on and off again, as I saw the curtains billowing like a breeze had blown through the house, even though the window was closed. As I was standing there in awe of what I had just felt and what I'd been seeing, I then heard noises outside on my tiny little balcony. It sounded like planters for pots being moved, like thumping sounds and scraping, things like that. I called Natalie over, and she quickly came through. I picked my phone up and threw open the curtains, and then quickly opened the window, and we both saw two impish, cherub-like entities with wings. One was emitting a pink, reddish aura, and the other had a greenish aura. They seemed extremely interested in the flowers and the plants I had out on my balcony. "Can you see them?" I asked Natalie. "No, but I can sense that something's there, and I can hear something. This is really weird." After she had said that, I watched them as they started to float off so quickly. I picked up my phone and I tried to take a picture. The picture didn't turn out, and Natalie never actually saw anything, so we're unsure of what we were dealing with that night, but I had the visuals and the sounds, as well as the feeling of energy moving through my body, and Natalie had simply just heard something very strange. So this strange story kind of begins in a theater. At the time I was about 27 years old, and I had my friend Josh with me. We were just watching a film. I don't even remember what it was, but we had this eerie feeling like we were being watched. We talked about it a little bit and we laughed about it and made some spooky jokes, but eventually we brushed it off and said that it must be the film getting to us, but I just couldn't shake the feeling. Eventually, after the movie, we started to head home. Josh lives about 10 minutes from where I live, but when we passed the Hill Street Bridge, I thought I saw a glowing pair of eyes from where I was standing, but I couldn't tell what kind of animal they were from by the way that they were shining. When I told Josh about it, he said, "What pair of eyes? What are you talking about? I didn't see anything." I just thought it was my head playing tricks on me. It was about 11:30 p.m., and I'd been up early from work that morning. I thought maybe I was just a bit tired. It started to rain a little bit while we were in the theaters, and in the middle of this walk home, it began pouring down rain, so we decided to run over to the bridge, stand under it, and just kind of wait the rain out. While we were under the bridge waiting, I felt like something brushed past my arm. After thinking that I saw a pair of eyes, and then having that happen to me, I had to ask Josh about it. When I turned to him, his face was pale white. He said that he had felt something too, and that he was just about to ask me about it. I felt the urge to leave so badly when I saw Josh looking behind me towards the corner of the bridge. Josh seemed to be horrified and frozen. He was just making some strange, weak breathing sounds. I turned and looked, and then I saw it. There were two pairs of eyes. Glowing white eyes. I grabbed Josh and I pulled on his arm, and I tried to get him to run, but he was petrified. I had to actually pull him away by his arm, which I never should have had to do, but when I say he was petrified, I mean he was frozen. His legs were stiff, his entire body was so tense, it was as if he had been dipped in concrete. Once Josh broke out of it, we both ran like we had never run before in our lives. Shortly after we began running away, I felt something gripping onto my back. Even though I had alarm bells ringing in my head and my brains were overridden by fear, I turned around to see what this might have been, and just then I was met with the most horrifying, deformed creature that I could ever imagine. It had its left eye where its mouth or something was supposed to be. It had sharp, jagged teeth, and it looked like it was leaking some kind of strange fluid from every pore of its skin. I started to stumble, and I was ripped back up onto my feet from Josh, who was grabbing my shirt and dragging me behind him. I eventually regained my balance, and I was able to run again, and we both made it to my house and locked the door behind us. We ran upstairs and looked out the second-story window, and we saw the creature was trying to get in. I don't really remember that much from that night. I remember running around and closing all the windows and locking the doors, and then it just seems like I passed out or blacked out. When I woke up again, I was in bed. I still had this overwhelming sense of fear and panic. I jumped out of bed, I ran over to the window, and I peeked out, and I saw that there was nothing outside. After sitting there for a while in disbelief, I finally came to the conclusion that I must have just come home, tired from my long day in the movie, and fallen asleep, and had a terrible nightmare. A short while after that, Josh called me and he asked if I wanted to see a film. I considered telling him about my dream, but I decided against it. If it came up, I would talk to him about it. I told him yes, that I would like to go see a film, but I thought it was strange since we'd just gone yesterday. When we got to the theater, it was the same film again from yesterday. I asked Josh why he wanted to see the same movie again, and he said that this was his first time. He said that this was the first time that the movie had ever aired. Something didn't seem right, and I thought this was all very strange. With all my reservations and an eerie, looming sense of fear, we went in and we watched the movie. Sometime while we were inside watching the movie, it had started to rain. Once we left the theater and started our walk home, it really began raining. It started pouring. Josh turned to me and said, "Hey bro, I don't want to get soaked out here. Why don't we go over there and wait this out under that bridge?" I live in a small town in Oklahoma. Shortly after moving there and moving into my dream house out in the country, I felt like a creature began to stalk me. It started sometime in the winter, and I received a phone call from my roommate while I was out of town. My roommate said, "Hey man, where do you keep the ammo for your rifle?" I just kind of laughed. It was a strange thing to say right out of the gates. I said, "Okay, whoa buddy, it's by my bed. Why?" My roommate then said, "Man, there's like a big black animal. It looks like it's as big as a German Shepherd out in the field behind the house." Apparently, after my roommate went and got the ammo, he peeked out the back of the house, and the creature was gone. After I'd gotten back home, I went to the spot, and I saw weird, large feline footprints. I'd never seen such a large black feline before, but I'd heard stories about them escaping from zoos and other things that I'm not sure I believe. The only thing I could think of that would be that big and that black would be a panther. It was sometime several weeks later. I walked around and I set up foot traps for coyotes in my back pasture. After that, I went out to check on my traps one morning. The only thing in my trap was a skunk, but that skunk had been mostly devoured, and my blood ran cold as I saw large feline tracks all around the trap area. Several months went by, and on another morning, I went to my truck to get my phone charger, and I noticed that it seemed as if all of the noises around me suddenly stopped, and I heard an ear-piercing scream that sounded like a woman screaming or a baby wailing, but much louder than a baby would ever be able to wail. I immediately ran inside and I locked all the doors. Sometime down the road after that, I went out and collected all of my traps. I noticed there was one missing, and I swear that I set it up, a large coyote trap, along with the metal stake that I would attach it to the ground with, where I'd drive it in about 14 inches. And just 3 days ago, as I was walking to my truck to go to work, I noticed there were large feline prints near my driver's side door. Mark Shackleman arrived at St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children a little before midnight. He carried his flashlight on his belt. As the night watchman for the school, he walked these grounds every single night. The school was located inside of a former Franciscan convent outside of Jefferson, and the grounds covered several old buildings, an orchard, and wide open fields where several old Native American burial mounds had been preserved. This was in the year of 1936. Shackleman was in his 30s. He was a husband and a father, and he worked an uneventful job for a paycheck to support his family. In rural Jefferson, there wasn't much to worry about, save for the possibility of a burglar or maybe some teenagers playing a prank. That night, Shackleman was crossing the fields when he saw a shadow. He squinted to see what it was. What he saw was a hunched form, and it was on all fours, digging into one of the burial mounds. From the canine way that it was digging, it could have been a dog, or maybe even a wolf, but even from far away, Shackleman could see that the thing was far too big to be either a dog or a wolf. Suddenly, the beast looked at him, and then it stood straight up. The sleek, hairy body unfurled to be over 6 feet tall. It had a shaggy canine face, but beneath the thick fur, it had the muscular body of a man. A low growl echoed across the field as it stared at Mark. Mark went on record saying that he could smell rotting meat. His heart beating fast, trying to control his breath, Shackleman stepped back. With sudden violence, the thing turned and ran off into the trees and was gone. The next night, Shackleman returned to St. Coletta for his usual rounds. As he walked the fields, he saw the shadow again, digging into the same mound as the night before. This time, he gripped his flashlight tight, ready to run or swing the flashlight if need be. Once again, the beast stood up, but this time it opened its mouth. Shackleman saw fangs hanging down and its lips pulled back into a snarl. It growled at him. It had a speech pattern kind of half human and half beast. Mark was too scared to move, and again, the creature turned and left. He never saw the creature again, but the horrendous growl and the way it seemed to speak to him stuck in his mind for years afterward. This legend is the first reported sighting of the creature that would eventually become known as the Beast of Bray Road. Sightings of the Beast of Bray Road became prevalent in the 80s and 90s, particularly centralized around Elkhorn. One woman reported the beast attempting to break into her home and later injuring one of her horses, leaving a large gash across its back. She claimed that the footprints it left behind were over 12 inches long. Another woman spotted it crossing the road in front of her car, and yet another driver saw it crouched on the side of the road, eating an animal. One young girl reported that the beast was chasing her through the forest. In 1999, an 18-year-old girl was driving down Bray Road near Delavan when she says her right tire hit something, lifting her car up off of the ground. She stopped and got out to see what she had run over, but there was nothing there. She looked to the side of the road and she saw a massive wolfish form standing up on 2 legs. She panicked and rushed back into the car, and as she peeled away, the beast leapt onto her trunk, but slid off in the slick rain, and she sped home. When the girl came forward with her story, many of the other sightings were reported as well, prompting both further investigation and fresh skepticism and mockery. These sightings prompted The Week, a Walworth County weekly paper, to send journalist Linda Godfrey to investigate and compile stories. While initially skeptical, Godfrey says she came to believe the sincerity of the witnesses that she spoke with. On her website, Godfrey writes, "There is a high probability that everyone is not always seeing the same thing. There could be a biological, physical animal seen by some, while others see phantoms or supernatural entities from a variety of sources. A few might even be misidentifications or even hoaxes. In 2003, Godfrey went on to write The Beast of Bray Road, Tailing Wisconsin's Werewolf, which recounted in depth what she had learned speaking to the many witnesses in and around Elkhorn who had reported interactions with the beast. Sightings of the Beast of Bray Road have slowed down considerably since the 90s, although one or another still crops up on occasion. Though the veracity and truth of any of the claims remains a cause for speculation, we're wondering if you or anyone you know has ever had any encounters with the Beast of Bray Road. Charles Hickson was one of two men who encountered cryptids while fishing on the west bank of the Pascagoula River in October of 1973. As these creatures would later become known as the Pascagoula River aliens, they were described as human-sized, with crab-like claws, spiky protrusions where a human's ears would be, and gray skin that was so wrinkly that Charles couldn't tell if they actually had eyes. The Pascagoula River aliens allegedly came from an oval ship that had flashing lights and made a hissing or zipping sound, and according to Hickson, the creatures abducted him and his fishing companion, Calvin Parker Jr. They gave a thorough examination to me, just like any doctor would, Parker later exclaimed. After that, the creatures, which Hickson assumed were robots of some sort, deposited the two men back on the shore where they had found them. The Pascagoula River aliens have never shown up again since then, but the story told by the two men has earned its place in the annals of cryptozoological lore. Ape-like humanoids may be the most common form of cryptid around. While Bigfoot is the most famous, it seems that just about every state has their own cryptid, from the rather dapper cryptid in South Dakota to the notorious Florida skunk ape. The Missouri monster, also known as Momo, is pretty obviously the state's contribution to the lore. Momo was first allegedly spotted in 1972 on the outskirts of Louisiana, a small city in Missouri near St. Louis. Momo matches the descriptions of many of the other ape-like cryptids around the world. Momo was described as being a tall creature with a large basketball or pumpkin-sized head. Momo is said to be covered in long shaggy hair and have a very pungent stench. One thing that sets Momo apart from the rest of the ape-like humanoid cryptid crowd is that Momo leaves behind a three-toed footprint wherever he goes. Though Momo hasn't risen to fame in the same way that Bigfoot, the Jersey Devil, or other cryptids have, between 1973 and 1994, the creature did have a ride named after him at Six Flags in St. Louis. With the thoughts in our heads of ape-like humanoids such as Momo and Sasquatch, if these seem to be the most popular cryptids, or the ones that most people talk about, then lake monsters can't be far behind. And while the best-known lake monster may hail from Loch Ness in Scotland, just about any good-sized body of water in America has a decent chance of hosting a cryptid all of its own. From the legendary Champy of New York's Lake Champlain, or even lesser-known lake monsters, like Nebraska's Alkali Lake Monster. Among these creatures, the so-called Beast of Busco, nicknamed Oscar after the first person to ever report seeing it, is both one of the most prosaic and the most charming. Essentially, Busco is just a very, very large snapping turtle, And when I say large, I mean the size of a small car. The beast of Busco took the town and the nation by storm in 1949, when reports of its presence put little Churubusco, Indiana, on the map and led to a massive hunt for the beast that included attempts at diving, draining the lake, and even bringing in a female turtle to try to draw Oscar out of hiding. Churubusco still celebrates Turtle Days every June, which features a parade and turtle races, all in the honor of their lake monster, Oscar. In 1893, Gene Shepard, a respected timber cruiser, stumbled into his logging camp and began to tell the wildest story of his life. According to Gene, he had just encountered a vicious beast, the great black Hodag. As Gene ran into camp energetically, excitedly, and panicked, he began to tell about this beast that he had seen, which he described as having spikes all the way down its entire length of its body, with a fistful of needle-sharp pointed spears at the end of its tail. He said that the monster had fangs that would rival a saber-toothed tiger, and that they could easily rip out the belly of the biggest bear. At some point after this, Shepard led a group of lumbermen into the woods to try and capture the beast with dynamite, and the men returned with charred remains. A photograph of the reenacted kill was published widely in many newspapers. Shepard was a bit of an anomaly. He was a prankster and a spendthrift. In one of his side businesses, he sold perfumed moss through the mail. On one occasion, he had a creditor knock upon his door. He jumped up, stuffed a bar of soap in his mouth, made sure to get his mouth good and foamy, and then he would turn around to the door and open the door and snarled at the creditor. The creditor ran away, not knowing if Shepard was rabid or not. The Hodag story, however, was different. Shepard kept it up for years. He told people that he found the Hodag, that he had captured the Hodag, that he kept the Hodag in his barn, and that he had destroyed the Hodag with dynamite. He made this another business. People came from all over the U.S. to see the Hodag. Shepard would put on a nice suit of clothes and then disappear from sight. He would keep the crowd waiting in anticipation until they began to grow unruly. Once Shepard felt that he had the crowd worked up enough, then there would come a horrendous commotion. Growling and snarling, snapping and breaking, tearing sounds, items being tossed and knocked over. After a few minutes, Shepard would come running back to the crowd with all of his clothes in tatters. He would then graciously apologize to the crowds, telling them that he would be unable to show them the Hodag, as the Hodag was being quite difficult and angry. Not long after this, Shepard started making the county fair circuit. Shepard's son helped him on this, working behind the scenes, making the Hodag monster move. Even back then, Shepard was alleged to have made up to around $500 in a single weekend. Shepard kept up the ruse until a reporter from the Smithsonian was sent to investigate it. The reporter refused to be duped, and he wanted to see the evidence, and eventually, Shepard had to admit the truth. When it comes to urban legends, there is a tendency for certain themes and motifs to reoccur. One such reoccurrence is the frequency of stories about goat men, or goat-like men, which have been cited in places as varied as Texas and Wisconsin. In fact, stories of goat-like humanoids go back at least as far as the ancient Greek myths, and they have ties to typical portrayals of the Christian devil. Two of the most famous goat-like cryptids in America bear some other striking similarities. The Maryland Goat Man and the Pope-Lick Monster, who purportedly lurks near Louisville, Kentucky. This is about the Maryland Goat Man. The Maryland Goat Man of Prince George's County, Maryland, has been sighted since the 1950s and is probably the best known and most persistent variation on the Goatman story in the United States. Like many other urban legends, the Goatman is fond of stalking lovers' lanes, where he is often spotted by teenage couples. The Maryland Goatman is most frequently associated with stretches of Fletchertown Road and Lotsford Road in Prince George's County, areas that were once sparsely populated, but nowadays have as many houses and malls as forested stretches for the Goatman to lurk. A favorite account claims that the Maryland Goatman was once a scientist named Stephen Fletcher, who worked at a nearby Beltsville Agricultural Research Center conducting DNA experiments on goats, until a tragic accident led to him becoming part goat himself. The center doesn't put much stock into the legends, though, at least according to the spokesperson, Kim Kaplan, who was quoted in Modern Farmer magazine as saying, "I mean, it's so silly, it's not even something that's joked about." But of course, if the center was indirectly responsible for the creation of the Goatman, then they would certainly have reason to deny any involvement. After all, no matter what their suppositions about his origins, the stories almost all agree that the Maryland Goatman is bloodthirsty. He's said to roam the back roads, attacking cars with a bloody axe. According to one source, the Maryland Goatman was blamed for the brutal murders of 14 hikers in 1962, their bodies chopped to pieces, while the Goatman emitted what were described as screams that only the devil himself could make. There may not be a lot of evidence to back that one up, but in 1971, a puppy named Ginger was decapitated in the city of Bowie. The incident was covered by the Washington Post, which described the poor dog as having been decapitated cleanly at the neck. The reporter of this story went on to note that the body was not found. While the article itself speculated that a train might have been responsible, some locals that were quoted in the article pointed the finger directly at the Maryland Goatman. After my father passed away, I went to live with my friend and his mom for a little while. Things with my mom were very strained, and I didn't want to stay at my friend's house initially, but they didn't want me alone during that time. Staying at anyone's house always made me feel uneasy for some reason. My first night there, early in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door opening, and a gentleman wearing a red flannel and bib denim overalls came into my room, holding a bag of tools. He turned the light on, looked at me, and walked through another doorway to the utility room. Soon after, I fell asleep again, but when I woke up the next time, the room was dark. Everything was the same when I went to sleep the night previously. Figuring that I imagined the whole thing, I went upstairs for coffee, and I asked my friend's mom if the guy with the overalls is still there. With a weird look, she paused and informed me that it's been her and I in the house all night, just the two of us, alone. At this point, I feel very confused. I start to explain stuff, and it doesn't make any sense. I break it down in detail, and I tell her everything about what the man looked like, height, weight, clothes, facial hair, everything. My friend's mom turns completely pale white. She bolts into her room and she retrieves a photo. She comes back out, and when she shows me the photo, it's the man that I saw in the basement that morning. The man's even wearing the same clothes in the photo. She tells me that this man passed away 30 years ago. She says it was her grandpa who owned the property previously. Apparently, her grandpa had killed himself to save the farm when he invested his money into horses instead of machines, and his investment flopped. He did this to keep the bank from taking his family farm. On a stormy night, he took a lightning rod into the middle of the pond, and nature took its course and took his life when lightning struck the rod. Because of this, life insurance paid out, and his death saved the family farm and kept the entire property from being foreclosed on. I saw a humanoid, something in the woods outside of my childhood home. This was rural northern Wisconsin, and I was about 14 years old. Up until that day, I had zero fear of the woods. I spent most of my time out there exploring, and I feared nothing. My parents had a lousy marriage, and they fought a lot, and I felt more at home outside the home than inside of the house. On hot nights, I'd take a sleeping bag and I'd sleep on the roof of an old shack on our property. I saw bears, I saw wolves, I saw a lot of things. They were always more afraid of me than me of them. I didn't really believe in ghosts. I didn't believe in Bigfoot. I didn't believe in demons. I didn't even believe in God. I only got lost out there once when dark fell sooner than I had expected. I stayed calm. I found the North Star, and I knew that if I continued to walk south, I'd eventually come across the old railroad tracks near my house. Even the thought of spending the night out there didn't bother me. The thought of my mom and dad's rage when I didn't come home did bother me. So it was summer. I had just turned 14. My mom had left my father. My father worked all the time. My sister was living on her own. Once school was out, it was me and my cat. And this is before the internet or smartphones. There was nothing else. We lived on a dead-end dirt road, and around noon I took my usual stroll down the long driveway to check the mail. My cat followed me everywhere, and I actually kind of relied on him to give me a heads up if there was a bear or something close by. A bit of movement behind me as I stood at the mailbox made me aware that there was something across the road in the trees, but there were pesky deer everywhere. I heard a loud crash, then I heard something very loudly making its way through the brush. It's like every goddamn classic horror story. My brain had no capability for the thought of anything paranormal or spooky. I simply tucked the mail under my arm and headed into the woods to investigate. My cat followed close behind me. I got about 10 yards into the woods when I noticed what I had never noticed before. There was no noise. Nothing. It was a beautiful June day, and there wasn't a single bird singing. There were no insects buzzing, and there were no leaves rustling. It was absolutely silent. At the same time I registered that silence, I got the eerie feeling that something was watching me. I stopped immediately, and I started scanning the woods for deer. My brain and my eyes were on absolute high alert. I think that hunters know what I'm talking about when I say that you look for the shape of a deer instead of trying to pinpoint them by the color. And that's when I spotted it. 2 brown furry legs, the top of it concealed by tree branches. I went to sigh with relief, and then all of a sudden, my cat hissed. I looked down, and he was completely poofed out with his back arched. He was looking at the exact same thing I was. His eyes were facing in the exact same area that mine were, and I assumed that he was looking at the exact same thing that I was. I looked back up, and I saw that the legs had moved. They didn't move like a deer. They moved like a human. Everything seemed to happen all at once after that. I dropped the mail. I picked my cat up by the scruff and I ran for it. Whatever was out there with me started running after me. I'd never run so fast in my life. I tore up the driveway, came into the house, locked the door, and I grabbed the phone. I called my next door neighbor, who was the ex-chief of police, and he came over immediately with his pistol. He checked out the spot that I was in and he found nothing. I feel crazy, but I was so hysterical I was in tears. My neighbor stayed with me until I was able to reach my mom and have her come home to get me. Of course, all the adults thought that I was completely delusional or, I don't know, high on drugs or something. I know exactly what I saw and exactly what I felt. It was broad daylight, for crying out loud. I never felt safe in those woods again, and I completely stopped sleeping outside after that. In October of 2016, I experienced what I believe to be an extraterrestrial inside of my house, followed soon after by 3 extraterrestrials inside of my house. It was a normal Friday evening at first. I was in college, living at my dad's house at the time. My dad had gone to sleep at about 10 p.m., and I stayed up till about 11:30 or so. Right around there, I turned off my TV and I went to lay on my bed, where I promptly pulled out my phone and began browsing Reddit. This lasted for about 45 minutes before I finally decided that I was going to put my phone down and try to go to sleep. I realized that my throat felt a little dry, so I got up to get some water from the fridge. My room used to be a second living room off of the kitchen, so there's no door on the frame, only a thick curtain. As I approached the curtain, everything was normal. It was just a normal night. The only thing that seemed a little off was how quiet it was. There were no crickets or cicadas chirping outside, which there always were, because I lived in a secluded country ranch house, so that was kind of unusual. I could still hear my dad's white noisemaker in his bedroom, though. He always used it to help him sleep. To me, it just felt like a normal late night. I pulled the curtain aside to step out into the kitchen, and then I experienced the single most terrifying thing in my entire life. When I pulled that curtain back, I saw behind the curtain what I believed to be an extraterrestrial or an alien. It was facing the hallway to my dad's room, and it was in a crouched position. We had a nightlight plugged in right above the kitchen countertop, so I assumed that it was trying to avoid that light. Its skin color was a sort of dark gray and gunmetal kind of color. As I pulled the curtain all the way back, the alien turned his head sharply to look at me. I gasped, realizing that I'd been caught, and I was immediately overcome by an immense sense of dread and terror. I was quite literally paralyzed by fear. I just stood there with my hand on the curtain, and my mouth was agape. It stared at me for a couple of seconds, and then everything that I saw went black. I regained consciousness about an hour later, and I was laying on top of my bed. My covers were still made. I woke up and my heart was pounding, and it felt like it was beating 1,000,000 times a minute. I saw something on my left, which was the darkest part of my room, and also had a door leading to our carport. Standing over my bed were 3 dark gray, gunmetal kind of colored figures. These 3 figures were tall. Their heads were nearly touching our 7-foot ceilings in my room. I turned my head and I stared at them, and I began to experience the same sense of terror as before. It was the same exact sense of dread and paralysis. I was unable to move. I was unable to speak. I was unable to do anything except for to look at them. This time they looked at me for much longer than a couple of seconds. It felt like it lasted a full minute or more. At the end of that minute, the being in the middle leaned in a little bit and moved its hand towards my foot. It tapped its finger on my foot 3 times, very slowly. Each time that it tapped, a strange sensation pulsed through my body. It was just a weird energy that I can't even really describe. Kind of like lightning and tickling and like a deep massage, I guess, all at the same time. After the 3rd pulse subsided, the being stood straight again, and then everything went black for me again. Once again, I regained consciousness. I would say maybe a minute or 2 later. I was still on top of my bed. The covers were still made, and I immediately began to cry. I don't just mean a tear or two. I mean that I was quite literally bawling my eyes out, shaking and convulsing for the next few minutes. After a short amount of time, all that emotion subsided, and I grabbed my phone from the bedside table. It was 3:33 a.m. I didn't end up going to sleep again at all that night. I just sort of sat there on my bed, trying to explain to myself what had happened. In the years since this happened, I've yet to come up with an explanation that doesn't involve aliens, demons, ghosts, angels, or some sort of paranormal phenomenon. I thought that it might have been sleep paralysis at first, but I never went to sleep before I saw the first one of them. I was completely wide awake when I went to get a drink of water. I wasn't dreaming because I hadn't gone to sleep yet. The only thing that made me question that was when the three of them came right after I thought that it could be a sleep paralysis, since I woke up in my bed, unable to move or even scream when they looked at me. But how did I get in the bed when the last thing that I remember was looking at the first one of them in my kitchen? I know you're supposed to be hallucinating or something when you experience sleep paralysis, but how did I see three distinct beings that essentially remained motionless? And what in the hell was that sensation whenever that one tapped my foot? If that was sleep paralysis, I've never had it before, and I've never had it since. If it was some sort of spontaneous mental breakdown, I've also never had one before, and I've never had one since. If it was just some bad nightmare, when did I go from browsing Reddit and getting a drink of water to being asleep and having a nightmare? It just doesn't make sense to me. Every time I think about it, I get an uneasy feeling. Just thinking about the dread that I felt that night, it makes my skin feel itchy and I feel squirmy and nervous. Obviously, I've never died, but that night, I think, felt like death. But I don't know if whatever was in my house, or whatever I imagined, was evil. I don't know if they hurt me, or did anything to me or my dad. I don't know if I went crazy, but I don't know if I was sleep deprived, or if I actually encountered aliens inside of my house. I've seen and felt some strange things before and after, including feelings like I'd kind of lost time, as well as seeing what I believe to be UFOs, and animals on the ranch that we live on being mutilated. The lost time thing was crazy freaky. I was texting my brother about Fallout 4, the video game, in the middle of the morning. I was in the middle of a response, was laying on the bed in my room, when all of a sudden, I was sitting on the couch in the first living room, opposite the kitchen to my bedroom. 7 whole hours had passed, and I didn't remember any of it. That's almost an entire worked shift. There were 2 texts from my brother during that time, about an hour apart. The first of which was him asking if I got his text. The second was just a couple of question marks. I was extremely confused, and I didn't know what to do. I had no explanation for this loss of time. Seeing the UFO thing, or whatever I saw, is pretty self-explanatory. It seems like since this encounter, I've seen lights fly over my house in the night. There's an airport about a half an hour away, and I see planes on occasion, but these lights are always either too fast to be a plane, too slow to be a plane, or they're too quiet to be a low-flying helicopter. The animal mutilation thing, that's the saddest part for me. I have about 10 outside cats, or barn cats as we call them here on the farm. I feed them quite regularly, and they help to keep away rattlesnakes and bugs and whatnot. Most of them are spayed and neutered and vaccinated, but the new ones show up, and they still get pregnant somehow. Every so often, one of them gets killed, be it by a mountain lion, a stray dog, a coyote, or other cats. It's gruesome, but it happens. But there've been a couple in the past few months that have made no sense, and they've always been the same way. These cats always have a single cut down the middle of their bodies, running from their jaw all the way down to their genitalia. The cut goes all the way through their sternum and everything. It's always perfectly straight, not jagged at all. I mean, people talk about surgical incisions. I've never seen a surgery, but I've never seen a cut so straight in my life outside of these. None of their internal organs or anything else are damaged. It looks like someone took a razor or something and slit them. We found them on our driveway and out on the private road leading to our driveway. There's never any blood, and the cat is just there, dead, on the ground, already in rigor mortis. It makes no sense, and it makes me sad, because I've raised most of these cats from when they were kittens. I think that I must have been about 7 or 8 years old, and I was visiting my paternal grandparents with the rest of my family. They lived deep in the woods, and I always hated it there. I felt like something was always watching, and it was always eerily quiet. I come from the city, so it was very quiet. But out there, it felt like there wasn't even crickets chirping. My little brother and I shared a bed in one room on the ground floor. My brother would sleep at one end, his head against the window or the wall, and I would be on the other, facing the window. On this particular morning, I woke up first. The sun was brilliant, making the room golden through the curtains. And there, a silhouette against the window, was a deer with the biggest rack of antlers that I had ever seen. It was right there, like almost pressed against the window in the profile. I just stared at it, completely in awe. And then that's when it changed. In one smooth movement, it reared up on its hind legs, and it was no longer a deer, but a man. There were only 2 men in the area, my grandfather and my dad, and it was clearly neither of them. I'm not sure if that made it better or worse, but it just wasn't either of them. My grandfather was very built for his age, and my dad had a gut. The silhouette was clearly younger, muscular, but not in the, like a brick sort of way that my grandfather was. The silhouette kind of exuded strength, and it scared the hell out of me. I averted my gaze for a moment, and then I saw the shadow as it strode off with purpose. I don't know what I saw. I want to believe that it was just the groggy mind of a half-awake kid, but I remember that fear slicing into me. I remember the feeling that there was something out there. When I was about 7 years old, I was sitting in my bedroom with my friend Celia. We were playing. I think we were building with Legos or something. It was late afternoon and our parents were outside the front of the house chatting. My bedroom had a window at the side of the house. At some point while we were playing, I looked up and I saw something. I saw something on the other side of the window. I have no idea how to describe this thing, and I haven't heard anyone else mention anything that even sounded familiar. From the neck down, this thing looked like a person. I can't remember what it was wearing, but I think it was dressed in like a dark blazer or something, like a suit coat or a business top, I don't know. The collar of this thing was visible, so I know that it was facing us. From the neck up, everything started to look very wrong. It seemed like its head was heart-shaped. The skin on this thing was brown and leathery. It was like the hide of an animal, but it was also slightly translucent. And beneath the leathery skin, I could see thick, pulsing black and dark blue veins. It didn't actually have a face. I remember looking at this thing for a moment, and it was like my brain had buzzed over from being scared, and I remember thinking something like, no, that's not meant to be there. That's not what a person looks like. I remember mostly feeling surprised more than scared, but feeling scared came later. I don't think I really thought that it was real. I slowly turned my head to look at Celia, and she was doing the same. She was turning her head to look at me. I saw her wide eyes and her mouth hanging open, and as I realized that we could both see this thing, the fear clicked in, and I thought, that is not a person. That is not a fucking person. What the fuck is that thing? That is not a fucking person. I remember being paralyzed with shock and fear. I wanted to bolt, but I couldn't move. I suddenly felt really, really sick. I felt like the room was blurry and spinning. I don't remember the thing walking away, but one moment it was there, and the next it was gone. Celia and I both stood up without saying a word, and we walked quietly outside. I don't remember wanting to do this, but it just happened. Once we got outside, I remember feeling unnaturally cold. I felt wobbly and fragile, and a little too thin, like when you're coming down with the flu. Celia and I walked to the front of the house, and we each grabbed onto one of our parents, and we snuggled into them until they finished their conversation. Neither one of us ever even brought it up to our parents. Hello again, everyone. Thank you for listening to this installment of Cryptids and Unknown Creature Encounters. We hope that you enjoyed this installment. As we love to do around here, we bid you a good day and sweet dreams.